At a certain point, many people experience this peculiar pattern. They wake up one morning with clarity and determination. This time will be different. They make plans, detailed ones, with spreadsheets and schedules and carefully considered strategies. They begin with real enthusiasm, genuine energy, the kind that feels unshakable. And then, sometimes within days, sometimes weeks, something happens. Not external obstacles, though those provide convenient explanations. Something inside them begins to resist. Subtle at first. A missed workout becomes a missed week. A moment of old behavior becomes a return to old patterns. The plans gather dust, and naturally they become frustrated with themselves. They think they lack discipline, willpower, some fundamental strength of character. They believe the problem is that they're not trying hard enough, not committed enough, not serious enough about change. But what if I told you that this resistance isn't weakness at all, but something far more interesting? What if the very thing you're calling failure is actually a kind of wisdom, one you haven't learned to recognize yet? You see, most of what we call wanting to change isn't actually desire for transformation at all. It's desire for approval, for fitting in, for finally being acceptable according to standards we've internalized but never examined. Someone along the way, maybe many someones, communicated that who you are isn't quite right. Too loud or too quiet, too ambitious or not ambitious enough, too emotional or too detached, and you absorbed this message, not consciously, but in that deep place where self-perception forms. So you constructed an image of who you should become, and you call this self-improvement. This is what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard was pointing out when he wrote about despair, which he defined not as sadness, but as a failure to be oneself. He described different forms of despair, but one stands out here: the despair of willing to be someone other than yourself, not because that other person is inherently better, but because you've been taught that who you are is insufficient. And here's the fascinating part. Kierkegaard argued that most people live in this despair without knowing it, calling it ambition or self-improvement or growth, when really they're trying to escape themselves. It's like this. Imagine someone hammering a nail and hitting their thumb repeatedly. The natural interpretation is that they need to hammer harder, be more careful, concentrate better. But what if the problem isn't technique? What if they're hammering the nail into the wrong board entirely, or using a hammer when they need a screwdriver? The pain, the failure, the resistance, these aren't signs to try harder. They're signals that something is fundamentally misaligned. Once you see this pattern, everything changes, because then your repeated failures at self-improvement aren't character flaws. They're your deepest self refusing to betray itself. And this creates a very particular kind of crisis, because you've been living with a certain story about who you should become, and that story has structure and meaning, even if it causes suffering. You know how to navigate that story. You understand the rules, even when you fail to follow them. It gives you something to work toward, something to explain yourself with. Now suddenly you're seeing through it, recognizing how much of your ambition was just internalized criticism, how many of your goals were attempts to finally be acceptable, and you're left in a strange space between identities. The old story no longer convinces you, but you don't yet know what replaces it. Let me give you an analogy. There's this creature called a lobster, and as it grows, something remarkable happens. Its shell becomes too tight, restrictive, painful even, and the lobster must do something that leaves it completely vulnerable. It must shed its shell entirely and grow a new one. But there's a period between shells, sometimes lasting days, when the lobster has no protection at all. During this time it hides among rocks, barely moving, because everything is a potential threat. The old shell is gone, but the new one hasn't hardened yet. The lobster isn't becoming something else. It's still a lobster, but it's between versions of itself, and that between state is dangerous and uncomfortable, and requires it to do something deeply counterintuitive. Stop moving, stop defending, stop doing all the things that kept it safe before. This is what's happening when you keep failing at self-improvement. Your deeper self is shedding a shell that no longer fits, an identity constructed from others' expectations and your attempts to meet them. And this period can last quite a while, much longer than you'd prefer. Because what you're waiting for isn't just a new shell, a new identity. You're waiting for something more fundamental to emerge, something that was there all along, but couldn't be felt through all that armor. The usual response is to try desperately to fix the situation, to get the change back on track, to force transformation through sheer effort. More plans, more discipline, more self-criticism. But this doesn't work because you're still operating from the same assumption, that who you are isn't adequate, that you need to become someone else to be acceptable. You're trying to grow a new shell that looks like what everyone expects, when what's trying to happen is something entirely different. Now you might think this sounds rather passive, like I'm suggesting you simply give up on growth or development, and you're right to question that. It's not about resignation or staying stuck. But it's also not about trying harder to meet standards that were never yours to begin with. I must warn you about something. This recognition, this seeing through your own self-improvement stories, doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels like loss. Because you're giving up not just goals and plans, but a whole way of understanding yourself and your place in the world. You're giving up the hope that if you just changed enough, tried hard enough, became good enough, you'd finally be acceptable, finally be at peace. And that hope, even though it was causing you suffering, gave structure to your life. Letting it go feels like stepping off a cliff. Let me tell you about someone I knew. For years, he was constantly starting new regimens, exercise programs, diet changes, morning routines. Each one began with tremendous enthusiasm and elaborate planning. He'd research obsessively, buy all the right equipment, tell everyone about his new commitment, and each one would dissolve after a few weeks, leaving him feeling ashamed and inadequate. He interpreted this as weakness, as a character flaw that needed to be overcome. Then something happened, something that wasn't dramatic or sudden. His father became ill, and he found himself spending long periods in hospital rooms, sitting quietly, not doing much of anything, just being there. And in that enforced stillness, something shifted. Not an insight exactly, more like a slowly dawning awareness. One day, he was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, drinking bad coffee, watching people come and go, and he realized he'd been trying to change himself into someone his father would be proud of. Not consciously, not explicitly, but that's what all the self-improvement had been about. His father had been an athlete, disciplined and successful, and he'd internalized the message that to be acceptable, to be worthy of love, he needed to become that kind of person too. The exercise programs, the strict routines, even the way he berated himself for failure. It was all in his father's voice, in his father's values. And sitting there in that cafeteria, watching his actual father, diminished by illness and suddenly very human, he thought, what if I just stopped? What if I stopped trying to become someone else's version of acceptable? He didn't make a decision exactly. He didn't create a new plan or set a new goal. He just stopped fighting himself, stopped starting and abandoning self-improvement programs, stopped interpreting every behavior through the lens of whether it made him acceptable. And something strange happened. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. He began doing things he actually wanted to do, not things he thought he should want to do. Small things. He started cooking, something he'd always avoided, because it seemed frivolous, not serious enough. He spent time with his children without constantly trying to be a better parent. He even started exercising again, but differently, not as penance or self-improvement, but because moving his body felt good. The change, when it came, wasn't transformation into someone new. It was relaxation into someone he'd always been, but had been too busy trying to change to notice. This is what I'm trying to describe, though words aren't quite adequate for it. It's not the excitement of self-improvement, that energizing feeling of becoming better, of ascending toward some ideal. It's quieter than that, more like settling, though not in a negative sense, like water finding its level. You're not trying to be anything. You're not trying to not be anything either. You're just allowing yourself to exist, without constant evaluation and adjustment. And from the outside, this might not look like much. People who are caught up in their own self-improvement stories might think you've given up, become complacent, lost your drive. But inside, something fundamental has changed. The constant commentary, the endless judgment, the exhausting vigilance about whether you're measuring up, it quiets down. Not completely, not permanently, but enough that you can hear other things, quieter things, deeper things. It's not peace exactly, it's more like truthfulness. Not the truth of your accomplishments or your failures, but the truth of what you actually feel, what you actually want, what you actually are beneath all the layers of should and must and have to. And this truthfulness, it doesn't feel impressive. It doesn't feel like enlightenment or transformation. It feels ordinary. Disappointingly ordinary sometimes. Because you're not becoming special or transcendent. You're becoming precisely what you are, which is both more and less than you imagined. And it's not nothing. The people around you, some of them will notice something has changed, though they might not be able to name what. You're less defensive, maybe. Less driven to prove things. More willing to admit uncertainty. More comfortable with silence. These aren't achievements. They're not things you did. They're what happens when you stop doing so much, stop trying so hard to be someone you're not. So what do you do in the meantime, while you're in that vulnerable space between shells? First, you do the ordinary things. You eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, move when you need to move. Not as a regimen, not as self-care, just as basic maintenance of the organism you are. You brush your teeth without it meaning anything about your discipline. You eat breakfast without it being evidence of your virtue or lack thereof. Simple actions done simply. And you watch, you observe what happens when you're not constantly evaluating and adjusting yourself. What thoughts arise when you're not trying to have the right thoughts? What do you want when you're not wanting what you think you should want? What does it feel like to just be yourself without trying to improve or fix or change? This isn't comfortable. Your mind will rebel against this simplicity. It will insist that you need to do more, be more, change more. That's fine, let it insist. You don't have to fight those thoughts or make them go away. Just notice them. Notice how much energy you've been putting into becoming someone else. And most importantly, you stop comparing. Stop comparing your current self to your imagined future self, the one who has finally changed enough to be acceptable. Stop comparing yourself to others who seem to have it figured out, who seem to be successfully executing their self-improvement programs. Stop comparing your present to your past, either congratulating yourself for progress or berating yourself for regression. All of this comparison, it's just more of the same pattern, more ways of saying that who you are right now isn't adequate. When you catch yourself doing it, and you will catch yourself doing it constantly at first, just notice, oh, I'm comparing again. Not as failure, just as observation. And you might wonder what happens if you really stop trying to change, really stop measuring and evaluating and improving yourself. Won't you just become stagnant, lazy, complacent? Won't you lose all direction and ambition? This is the fear, isn't it? That underneath your self-improvement efforts there's nothing. That if you stop pushing yourself, you'll collapse into some kind of baseline mediocrity. But here's what I've observed. When people really stop trying to be someone else, when they stop fighting themselves, something does change. But it's not the change they were trying to force. It's not transformation into some idealized version of themselves. It's more like alignment. They start doing things that actually matter to them, not things they think should matter. They find energy for genuine engagement, not the manic energy of self-improvement, but something steadier, something that comes from actual interest rather than obligation. Paradoxically, it's only when you stop trying to change that real transformation becomes possible. Not the dramatic transformation you were imagining, where you become someone entirely different, someone finally acceptable, but a quieter transformation, where you become more yourself, more aligned with what you actually are beneath all the accumulated layers of should and must. And this doesn't happen because you make it happen. It happens because you stop preventing it. Perhaps the reason you keep resisting change is that you've outgrown the person you were trying to become, not because you're better than that vision of yourself, but because you're finally seeing it for what it was, an attempt to be acceptable to others, to meet standards that were never truly yours. And now you're being thrown back on something more fundamental, not an identity you construct, but a truth about what you are that was there all along. And it's not nothing. It's not the absence of yourself. It's the presence of yourself, without the constant improvement project, without the endless evaluation. Just you as you are, which is both less impressive and more real than anything you were trying to become. You just forgot for a while. forgot that you were already complete, not in the sense of being finished or perfect, but in the sense of being whole. And all that resistance, all that self-sabotage, all those failed attempts at change, they weren't weakness. They were your deepest self reminding you, refusing to betray itself, waiting for you to stop trying to be someone else and just be.